Well, welcome everyone. I'm so excited to have Ericka Anderson join us today. She is a writer, an author. She is a course creator, and she teaches people, writers in particular, how to pitch and freelance their words to the world around them. I've been following Ericka for a couple of years. I've been a part of some of her webinars. She has some really great resources, a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom to share with writers. And I know that many of you are interested in getting your words and your work out into the public sphere in a more intentional way. And so we are really excited about what Ericka is going to teach us today. She has an appointment this afternoon, and so this is going to be a shorter gathering than usual. And we are also having a little bit of some recording delays. And hi, Cheryl, I see that you're in. As people come in, and we're just going to keep talking. But I want to just give you the opportunity, Ericka, to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and the work that you do.
Sure. And I know I don't know how much there is a delay, but I feel like we have one. So just know that if there's like a pause, everyone. My name is Ericka Anderson. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. And yeah, I'm a freelance writer. I have published two nonfiction books and one of them this year, which is really cool. But I also teach people how to write freelance writing, articles in magazines and newspapers, as well as building like freelance businesses in terms of copywriting and content writing. So really across the board with my business Pitch and Publish. And so, I think one of the big mysteries that a lot of writers, getting into it have is like, how do you get your writing published? How do you get a byline? Like, what's the secret to breaking into some of these spaces? And not realizing that this would be something that I would teach people. I wanted to do that 2 years ago and began exploring and spent lots of time figuring it out, and was ultimately successful in a lot of ways. And so decided I need to teach other people this, because I wish I would have had this for myself, for me back then. And so that is part of my job now. And I love doing it and connecting with writers. I guess other things about me: I'm a mom of two. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. Been married for 10 years to my husband, Rick. And yeah, I guess those are the main points.
Those are the big pieces of the puzzle. So how did you get started? You mentioned that you're a twice published author, and that's awesome. Did you, this whole freelance writing aspect of the work that you do, did that come before or after the published authoring work that you've done with the
Yeah.
books?
Well,
Yeah, which came first?
Yes. Yeah. So I had done some writing. I was a journalism major, and worked in a lot of communication spaces where I did a little bit of writing here and there, but more for the places I was working rather than really like pitching my work and freelance writing. And so with the first book, I I hadn't done a ton of the articles yet. And so, but it was really the book itself that really inspired me to start working more towards the freelance writing, because I actually, the book idea was just sort of like, when it began, it was sort of just always the thing. I want to write a book. I've always wanted to write a book. I've always been a writer since I was a kid. And so this particular book was about my husband and his life growing up in some really traumatic and rough circumstances. But out of that, I learned so much about things like addiction and depression and the opioid crisis. And so that made me want to write more about those topics. I had something to say, and that's what inspired me to start freelance writing and pitching articles. And then I sort of got hooked on it, because I was like, oh, wow, like this can actually work. And so it became much more a part of my life after that first book and leading up to the second. And then, of course, now, I didn't even realize, ultimately, I didn't realize I even could do all the publishing that I had in some of these bigger places, because I just thought, you have to be somebody to do that. And you don't. And that's one of the things that I teach people.
Well, I like that you said you figured out you had something to say, and it was out of writing your book that you realized, oh, there's more. I have more inside me that I want to share. Um, Tell us a little bit of some of the publications that you have been published in.
Yeah, so the first one that was like the most notable was the Wall Street Journal. And that idea came out of the original book, which is where I had found studies about how faith community and having a spiritual life was like so valuable to people's mental health. And so that first article that I published there was called, "Is God the Answer to the Suicide Epidemic?" And, that gave me a lot of confidence. I never really thought it was possible, but I put it out there and I tried it and it ended up working out. And I think that really kicked me into a lot of confidence to try pitching some other places. And I had something in the Washington Post soon after that. I eventually had some in the New York Times. But that's not to say that those are the only places that are worth being published in. Of course, like I've been published in a lot of smaller places as well, which is a lot easier to get into. But it's sort of just having I guess like the guts to put yourself out there and be like, could this work? Maybe. And also I've done a lot of listening to editors, whether it be on panels or just watching what they have to say on Twitter. And they say over and over, we are totally open to publishing first-time writers. Like, we love fresh ideas. And that was very motivating to me to realize that editors are looking for new voices and new ideas. And you don't have to be, Brene Brown or somebody that's like famous or important to have a good idea and be a good writer.
That's so encouraging. And I think one of the things that you talk about a lot is just that anybody can do this. And I think so often that is one of the biggest impediments for us even trying, because those publications that you mentioned are the top of the top, right? So to say you've been published in the Wall Street Journal, like that just feels out of reach for most people, right? But I think what you often teach teachers is just that, first of all, you'll never know if you don't try. And there are certain things that you can do to position yourself in a more favorable light. Obviously, there's rejection is a part of this process, but what should people know about when it comes to writing pitches for publication?
Well, I think, I started writing pitches and they were very bad. And, I began to learn from that. I didn't know what I was doing. But, some of the things I tell people who want to get into that are try to avoid pitching inboxes that are like submissions. So like submissions at NewYorkTimes.com. I would never pitch to that because that's going to be a big black hole of all kinds of random things. Everyone's sending stuff there. So you can locate what you need to do is figure out who is the editor of the section that I'm looking to publish in, and then you need to find their email. And that's actually, sometimes it can be tricky, but often it's pretty easy. You can look and figure out like, oh, it's like they use nytimes.com emails, and it's generally going to be like their first name, first initial, last name, or something like that. So you can sort of do some online exploring and figure out like how they set up their emails. Sometimes you can just search the editor's name on Google and their email will pop up. Sometimes it's on Twitter. There are a lot of different ways that you can sort of do some sleuthing around, figure it out. There are plenty of editors out there too that put their email addresses out there because they want pitches. It just depends on sort of what you're pitching. So that would be rule number one, is to pitch an actual person to their inbox. And also remembering, people get very nervous about that, but remembering that that's what editors are used to. They expect people they don't know to send them in emails and pitches. You just start off your email as if you already know them. You don't need to explain why you're there or how you got their email. You just say like, "Hi, Jamie, I have a pitch for the culture section of whatever, here it is. And that's just how it's done. And that's very normal. And they get lots of emails. So you want to keep it short. You want to get to the point. You want to have a good subject line. Your subject line should say freelance pitch : and then have like a main theme sentence, something that is ideally curiosity driven, that will make them want to click and read further. You have only so much time to get their attention. And then give that idea very quickly. And it needs to be specific. It needs to be, you don't want to ask them if they have anything for you, like they don't, they're
They
looking for
don't.
your ideas. So there's a lot more to it in terms of how you frame the idea, but those are a few of the sort of beginner tips I would say that I like to share with people.
That's really helpful, especially for newbies. But before you get to that point where you have an idea and maybe you've written something, or maybe you're, still in that ideation phase, like talk to us a little bit about how to, I mean, I think for me, that's one of the hardest things. It's like, oh, I want to come up with an idea. And so I get very, um, I get stuck in how to come up with something that's like a new, fresh take on something. So do
Mhm.
you have any tips for how to ideate for article pitching?
Yes. One of the best ways to sort of try to come up with something fresh or different is to ask a lot of questions. And so when you are looking at the subject that you want to write about, like just start letting yourself ask a lot of questions and see where they lead you. Like, what isn't known about this? Like, what aren't people talking about? What is like a mystery? Once you start asking a lot of questions, you're usually led down a path that will be perhaps different than what you've seen. Um, uh, it's also remembering that a lot of times we have an issue with taking a subject that's very like trying to do too much with a subject. But when it comes to a lot of these kinds of pieces that we're pitching, it has to be such a smaller subset of whatever the topic is. So it's like one person's story. It's one facet of the issue, and you're digging into it and you're talking about how it represents something larger. I think the other thing I would say is people get caught up in being like, well, somebody's already said that, or like, I'm not smart enough. But it's like, I'd like to remind people that, there is nobody reinvents the wheel. If somebody's writing about something in a newspaper in California, you can write about it as well, maybe from the same angle, even in Virginia. The same people aren't reading that, right? And the way that you write and think is going to be different than the other person. And so it's just a letting it be okay. And if you want to write about it, pitch it. Every magazine or newspaper is not, they're not reading every magazine or newspaper in the world. And so your idea does not have to be like the unicorn of all unicorns for it to fly.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is like, it can be silly or it can be serious. I mean, if you look at the papers and then magazines, you see there are plenty of stories that are not about anything that all that serious. There are plenty that is serious, but you don't have to be writing a Nobel Peace Prize winning article in order to get published.
Well, that's encouraging, right? Because I think that's often what we think is like you have to come up with a brand new slant on something. And so do you do that in your own writing process? Do you do research on other publications, maybe far away, like you said, a California publication versus a New York publication, where maybe the eyeballs don't see the other take on that issue?
Well, usually I'm not necessarily specifically doing it geographically, but I do a lot of Googling. And so I will see what pops up and where it pops up. If it pops up in some obscure place, or, it's definitely not something that's probably going to have been seen by another. No, I'm not just like trying to take an idea and copy it, but I'm saying like, well, my perspective is sort of out there maybe in that, I just want to make sure like the places that I'm pitching are not already covering it that way. That's you want to make sure like the place that you're pitching has not already covered that sort of angle, or it's not been overdone there. And so I use Google a lot to just Google topics, subjects. The other really, my big thing that I talk about a lot is research and data, which is there's always fresh data out about literally everything. Like you could be talking about new flavors of popcorn. You could probably find a poll about it. And so having new data automatically it's sort of like the lazy hook. It's the lazy angle. It's like, oh, there's a new study out about this thing that I want to write about. Well, just the information from that study is new information. Even if you're writing it from like a perspective that's been out there, now you're hooking it to this new information. So that's fresh for a publication that might make them more willing to take it. And also when you include sort of examples, maybe you have a personal example, maybe you've interviewed someone that has an example. Well, those examples aren't anywhere else. And so that's going to give you a unique angle as well.
So in other words, it doesn't have, I mean, it can have some reused elements, but adding this kind of flavor of a new data points, new polling numbers, whatever the case may be, like that is enough to kind of give it a freshness, even if it's a topic that's been, written about quite a bit. So
Right. Like I write a lot about so I write about some controversial things. So, but I'll just give you an example. So one of the topics I write about is surrogacy. And so last time I wrote about that, there were several new stories that I could reference in terms of some of the concerns I had. And so because I had these new examples, it was like a really fresh take. I had some of the same points I've made before. However, I was able to say, well, look at this situation and this happened last week. And so anytime there's new things happening, it's like the world is always going, like history is happening in real time. And so we can always, bring in what is the latest, And also it's interesting. Another thing that often will help with ideas is looking at the history of your subject. When you read an article, a lot of times one of the main parts will be looking back at the history. So if you're writing about, say, I don't know, country music concerts of 2023, well, maybe you look back and see like, well, when did these kind of concerts begin? And like, what were they like back then? And what's changed? And you might come up with a fact or just like a little detail where you're like, oh, that's so interesting. Like, I don't even know what, I just totally made that up. But when you look at history, you're like, well, what's different about this now? And what was the other thing I was going to say? Yeah, I lost it.
no, but that's really, I really like that. I think that's really helpful. And it does open up the whole like Pandora's box of ideas, right? Because I think so often we think we have to have personal experience with something. Do you feel that that's true? I mean, you mentioned surrogacy, and I know you've written about church issues and things like that. So, how much of what you write about is just something that you're personally interested in and wanting to learn more about, or versus feeling like you have to have some sort of personal element, some story, some bit of experience to add to the conversation?
It can definitely help if you have a personal tie. I mean, one of the core things that you want to, if you can in a pitch is, why does this story matter now? And why are you a good person to write it? But a lot of times I think people get hung up on that and they say, oh, I'm not an expert, what do I know? But as a writer, you don't have to be necessarily the expert. You can let the experts speak for you in the piece. And so that means getting quotes, interviewing people, gathering the data that gives you the sort of the foundation that you need to write about it. And so like I haven't experienced surrogacy, for example, but now that I've sort of made it a bit of a niche for myself to write about, I know a lot about it. I've read a lot of books about it. And that's where, having at least kind of focusing in on a niche sometimes is really helpful, because the more that you write about it, the more that you know about it, the easier it is to come up with story ideas. You're integrated into this world. You have facts at your fingertips. You become someone that people know, like may come to with questions about it. And then another really great thing to do if you want to write about something is just having conversations with people. So if you're writing about a topic, like people that are inside an industry or inside of a trend or something like that, they're not writers, they're not looking to write stories, but they know a lot of things that they don't even realize might be something that would make a good story. So if I was
Right. Yeah.
talking to a say I was talking to a pediatrician, say I had a friend who's a pediatrician, and he was like, yeah, I'm like seeing all these kids with some random thing. Well, I might be like, well, what do you mean? Like, that's new. That's a new thing. So you're saying that's weird. Why is that weird? So it's like you start to think in it as a storyteller. You start to hear things and you go, oh, that could be a story. That's interesting. People don't know about that because these people aren't writing about it, but you have the opportunity to do it and make it known and seen and heard.
That's super interesting. So, do you think that for the beginner writer, is a better strategy to start small and go big? Or do you shoot for the fences and go for the big guns? Do you have a
It's,
recommendation on that?
it doesn't, you're more likely to get some hits if you start small. So maybe that will give you more confidence. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing it either way. I think one book that I would highly recommend to everyone is called The Byline Bible. I think the author is Susan Shapiro. And so she is a freelancer that has been published everywhere. And she teaches a class at the New School in New York Journalism School or something, New York University, or I can't remember. Long story short, though, the whole book is full of her basically telling stories of her students who have never been published before, getting their articles published in magazines and newspapers. A lot of them are personal essays. But having a unique personal story, it can be a real help for some of this stuff. Doesn't mean, you still have to make it different because there's a lot of people that have really traumatic stories, but you got to make it, different, better, and actually unique. But start small, but throw a big one in there. You just never know. It's just a matter of like making sure that you are following the submissions guidelines for the publication, which you can usually get by Googling the publication and like submissions guidelines. And find that editor, make sure you're getting it to a person, and see what happens. The other thing is, there is a great newsletter there's several newsletters to subscribe to, but there is one in particular called Opportunities of the Week. It's by a woman named Sonia Weiser. Opportunities of the Week. I think it costs like $3 a month. And she sends out twice a week magazines and newspapers that are taking pitches, and she collects them from Twitter and other places. And you can just like, you'll see like, oh, like Cosmopolitan wants pitches on something, I don't know, whatever. They'll tell you what they want. And then a lot of times they have their email, like, pitch me here. And yes, they're going to get a lot of pitches, but it makes it a lot easier to know, oh, well, I have an idea for that, or I could come up with an idea for that. That's where basically anytime I pitch somewhere new, I'm basically always getting it from that newsletter because I don't have time to go look for them myself.
Yeah. And I bet they're kind of tucked away in many nooks and crannies online. So that's really cool. Well, I know that you need to go pretty soon, but why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk to us about on Thursday?
So I guess Thursday I'll just be expanding on what we talked about a little bit here, pitching, talking about how to do it well and how it works, and it will expand into magazine and newspaper. There'll be maybe some about the freelance copywriting and things like that. I sort of focus on both because the freelance copywriting and content writing stuff is sort of where you will make more money. But I like to have a nice balance because I am not just about money. I am also about creativity and sharing what I care about. And so what I find is you can find a good balance to where you give yourself that you are able to allow yourself the creative space to do the projects that you really want to do. And so that is what I'll talk about. And I'm happy to answer any questions after that on Thursday.
Yeah. Well, that will be really great. We thank you so much, Erica, for being with us today. And just encourage you all that, no matter where you're at in your writing journey, whether you've never been published before, or maybe you've had one or two, but you have the hope and the desire to dig in more, either as a freelancer or as to submit and pitch articles for bylines, to tune in with us again on Thursday and hear more from Ericka.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Ericka. We will see you on Thursday.
See ya.
Bye. All right.